We've mentioned in our series here that if you are a Latin Rite Catholic, yes, you can receive Holy Communion at an Eastern Catholic liturgy, and also it counts for your Sunday obligation, although we don't tend to speak so much in terms of obligation in Eastern churches, but it still counts. In the same way, if you're a Latin Rite Catholic, you can go to an Eastern Catholic priest for confession. Now, our approach to confession is one where the priest acts kind of like not so much a judge, but a healer. It's like going to the doctor, and he tends to give you advice, like spiritual advice, which you can call your penance, to help heal, because confession is all about healing and reconciliation. But before we get to the specifics about confession in Eastern Catholic churches, the question is always raised by everybody: why go to a priest for confession? When we go to the priest for confession, it's because when we offend by sin, we offend God, yes, but also the church, the community, which is the presence of God, Christ, on earth. A lot of people say, why can't I just confess to Christ? Well, you can confess to Christ, but it's not complete. In the early days of the church, you know what confession was? Wait till you hear this. You had to stand outside the church. You couldn't go in. And when people came into church, you had to beg for their forgiveness. Sometimes this went on for years, especially for big sins like adultery. Eventually, though, you could come into the church, you had to stand up in front of everybody. Stand up in front of everybody. Imagine that. Confess your sins, ask for forgiveness. Then you were allowed back in to the church. That was confession. Because you see, when you sin, you offend God and the community. So you have to make up for both. Well, eventually, the church realized that the priesthood was the convergence, the meeting point of God and the church. So for lesser sins, people could go to the priest, not himself personally, but to the office of priesthood, because in there you're encountering Christ and the community. So when you confess your sins and ask for forgiveness, you're asking forgiveness from Christ and from the church through the priesthood. More about confession in Eastern Catholic churches next time.